The man collapsed with a crash that silenced the restaurant. His chair clattered against the tiled floor, his body convulsing, hands clawing at his throat. For one dreadful moment, no one moved. Forks froze midair. Eyes widened. A murmur of confusion spread through the room like wildfire. And then panic. The dying man's lips turned a terrifying shade of blue. A dozen patrons stared, horrified, but no one stepped forward. It was the kind of collective paralysis that happens when ordinary people are confronted with extraordinary crisis. And in the center of it all, one young woman stood from her table, her pulse already steadying into resolve. Her name was Emily Carter, a nurse barely 3 years into her career. She had come to the little diner only for a quick meal after a long shift at the hospital. She had not expected to find herself kneeling beside a stranger, fighting for his life, with the judgmental eyes of a silent crowd fixed on her back. Her hands pressed against his sternum, precise and unrelenting. She counted compressions in her mind, blocking out the gasps, the clatter of dropped plates, the frantic shuffle of people who wanted to help but were too afraid. Only Emily heard the faint whisper from the man's lips between compressions, one word, rasped with his last ounce of strength: seal. The room grew still again, but now for a different reason. The people understood. He wasn't just a man. He was a warrior, one of the Navy's silent elite. And he was slipping away before their eyes. Emily Carter had grown up in a small town where patriotism wasn't a slogan. It was a lived reality. Her father had served 2 tours in Iraq. He never returned the same. Some wounds were visible, his limp, his scarred hands, but most were invisible, locked behind weary eyes. Emily had spent her teenage years bandaging him with compassion more than medicine, learning that healing wasn't just physical. When he passed away during her 2nd year of nursing school, she vowed to dedicate her life to helping those who carried invisible battles. She knew the loneliness of veterans, the quiet grief of their families, the silence that swallowed their sacrifices. Her work in the hospital often left her drained, yet she carried an unshakable compassion that made patients trust her instantly. She was not just a nurse, she was a listener, a keeper of untold stories. That night at the diner, when fate thrust her into the spotlight of life and death, Emily's soul responded before her mind could even think. But not everyone in the diner understood. As Emily fought to bring the man back, one impatient voice cut through the room. A businessman in a pressed suit scoffed loudly. "She's wasting her time," he muttered to no one in particular. "If he's choking that bad, he's gone. Call an ambulance and step aside." His words dripped with condescension. Several bystanders nodded, as though surrender was the easier choice. The quiet complicity of the crowd pressed down on Emily like a suffocating weight. But she didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. Her silence became its own defiance. Minutes stretched into eternity. Sweat streaked her temples. Her arms burned with exertion. And then against all odds the man's chest jolted, his lungs convulsed, and a ragged breath ripped from his throat. He lived. The restaurant erupted in relieved applause, but Emily hardly noticed. She simply sat back, trembling, tears threatening her composure. She had saved him. And in that moment, she had unknowingly set into motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. The man she had saved, Commander James Hollis, a decorated Navy SEAL, was rushed to the hospital. Emily returned home that night alone, her clothes still damp with sweat, her mind replaying the moment his pulse had returned under her hands. She told no one. She wasn't the type to seek recognition. But not all were silent. The businessman who had doubted her was quick to spread his version of events. He told anyone who would listen that she had grandstanded, wasted precious time, nearly killed a man by refusing to wait for paramedics. His voice was smug, loud, and certain. Emily said nothing. She kept working her shifts, carrying the weight of unspoken criticism. Yet inside, she clung to the single truth that mattered. She had refused to give up. At the hospital, Hollis regained consciousness within hours. His first question to the nurse by his side was not about his own health, but about the young woman who had refused to let him die. "She saved you," the nurse said softly. A girl named Emily Carter. Hollis closed his eyes, and something unspoken passed across his face. A soldier who had seen the worst of humanity now felt the weight of a debt that words alone could not repay. He whispered, one line the nurse never forgot. Some battles are fought in silence, and she won one for me tonight. The next morning, Emily returned to her modest apartment. The air smelled of brewed coffee and quiet exhaustion. She dropped her bag on the counter, prepared for another ordinary day. And then she heard it boots on pavement. She opened her door to a sight that stole her breath. Lined along her street were rows upon rows of uniformed men and women. 200 soldiers, their formation stretching beyond the eye's reach. They stood in silence, every face turned toward her door, every posture radiating respect. At the front stood Commander Hollis, alive because of her. His presence was steady, his eyes fierce yet softened by gratitude. No words were spoken at first. The silence itself was thunderous, a roar of respect that needed no explanation. Then Hollis stepped forward, saluted her with crisp precision, and spoke just one sentence. Because you refused to let me die, none of us will ever let you stand alone. The businessman who had mocked her stood in the crowd that had gathered to witness. He shrank back as the weight of her silent vindication crushed his arrogance. Justice had not come through argument, but through the overwhelming honor of those who understood sacrifice. Neighbors wept openly. Strangers clutched their hearts. Emily's own knees nearly gave out as tears blurred her vision. She was not used to recognition, not used to standing at the center of such reverence. Yet in that moment, she realized something profound. It was not about her alone. It was about every silent nurse who had held a hand in the dark, every medic who had saved a life no one remembered, every soldier who had come home invisible to the world they protected. The soldiers raised their hands in salute, a forest of unspoken gratitude, and Emily, trembling yet resolute, placed her hand over her heart. As the soldiers dispersed that day, the street remained forever marked by their presence. Neighbors would speak of it for years. The morning, when silence turned into the loudest tribute imaginable. Emily Carter returned to her quiet life, but she was no longer the same. She carried with her the knowledge that every act of courage, no matter how small or silent, ripples outward in ways we cannot imagine. Respect is not earned through applause, nor lost through criticism. It is defined in the quiet moments when we choose to act, even when others turn away. And sometimes, the truest form of honor arrives not in medals or speeches, but in the silent unity of those who understand sacrifice.